What I'd like to do now is to begin today's lectures by walking you through basically an 8 to 10 session either individual counseling series with complicated grieving or a group counseling series of sessions with complicated grieving. So the first session, as I stated before, it's really important to help the client to become aware of how difficult this is going to be, the broad range of emotions, that they're not going to want to come back because they don't want to re-experience these difficult emotions every time they come to sessions, but helping them to understand that it's only by working through those emotions that they will begin to experience some peace. I think it's important to encourage clients to come back. And after 4 or 5 sessions, especially group sessions, they'll look forward to coming back. It's those first couple sessions that are really just so difficult because these are difficult emotions. So that's how I begin, and also I encourage them to share their story, to tell me their narrative. What is their story? Not only their story of what happened with the death of their loved one or whatever loss they might be experiencing, but the story of life with that other individual. It's so important. I want to hear the whole story. That might take an entire session, the sharing of the narrative. If it's a group, I want them to share the most important parts with one another. That might take a long time. I try to keep groups down to 6 people. If there's more than that, I would start another group. But that also helps individuals hear other people's stories as well. It may be emotional, it may be tearful, and that's okay. That's part of the process of sharing one's story. The second component may sound similar, but it's not. It's sharing the relationship. So I heard your story, falling in love, getting married, if they were in a marriage, if they were good friends, if they were related in some way, if it was a pet, whatever it was, how did it begin? All of that, whatever amount of time they were together, that's their story. But I want to hear the second component is what is the relationship? What was the relationship? Was it difficult? What were the struggles? What did you argue about? What were the things that bothered you? What were the things that you loved? So I want to get into a little more detail about the dynamics of the relationship. And that's what leads to all the really bad things too. If they were estranged, if they were separated, if they had said horrible things, whatever it might be. And then this leads us into that third component. And a lot of times I'll just divide this up into 2-week sessions or 1-week sessions if it's individuals, whatever works time-wise. But I will divide this into segments so they can think about it the week beforehand a little bit. The sharing of the relationship and the difficulties is the most difficult session. The next thing, once we begin to understand the relationship, what made it a complicated relationship? Perhaps it was just the traumatic experience that complicated the grieving process. And we'll hear about that too, the last portion of the relationship. But then the third component is dealing with regrets. And last week we went over regret therapy. And this is where I would use regret therapy. The fourth session, not the fourth the fourth segment, the fourth component, I actually have them bring in an important item, something that they would connect with the other individual. One person brought in a poem that the other person wrote. One person brought in a picture. Pictures are very common. One person brought in a painting their loved one had done, painted. One person brought in their dog's favorite toy. Whatever it might be. These are all emotional things. And I have them tell me the story about this connection. And or tell one another about this connection. A lot of times this can be helpful when people don't want to make any change. They're keeping rooms exactly like they were. They're stagnant in any type of movement. So we don't want a client to make big choices, like don't sell your house and move right after a major loss. Don't make huge decisions. But also, we don't want clients to be stuck either. Memorialization, there's healthy memorials and unhealthy memorials. So, for instance, a charitable foundation in somebody's name, that's a healthy memorial. Keeping a room as a museum to remember somebody and not to touch anything, that may not be as healthy. So talking about an item may help people move forward through that as well. We talk about where people might be stuck. We talk about the negatives, the positives, what meaning it has to people, meaning they can find by moving forward, how the other individual would want them to live. The next component is beginning a reintegration process. Now we know mourning grieving takes at least a year. However, reintegration is a gradual process. So how do we reintegrate different parts of our lives after this loss? What happens? How do we reintegrate this change in the relationship with the deceased? They're part of who we are, and yet our daily routine has changed. Our future has changed. So how do we reintegrate that? How does that relationship play out now as part of who we are, differently than if they were with us physically? How do our routines change? How do we make that a positive part of our life? And we discuss all of this, and this might take a number of sessions. And the last thing, I want to help the client to reframe this process, even though it's very sad, it's a loss, but what positive thing can they take from this? It might be a memory, it might be a goal, it might be, a change, a positive change they want to make in their life. Something, but something that has meaning to them. And that's really how we end the process. If people are still struggling with regret and not moving forward, even after regret therapy, one thing we talk about is the parabolic experience. You can throw this in any place in the middle of the therapeutic process. People believe that they are still the same individuals who made those mistakes that led to regret. Mistakes are the means by which humans learn and grow. Often, mistakes are painful. Mistakes cause emotional turmoil. But if we can learn from them, then we are no longer the same individual that we were when we made those mistakes. We have grown. We have become an improved individual. So part of the process of the parabolic experience is coming up with a metaphor. It could be a religious metaphor, a fairy tale, a brand new metaphor, but something. A good example is the prodigal son. Prodigal son is working on a farm with his brother and his dad, and he says, "Give me my inheritance now. I want to leave. I want to make it on my own." He goes, he squanders his inheritance, gambles, spends it. There's nothing left. He's working on another farm, sleeping with the swine. He says, "Even my own father will treat his workers better than this." He is humbled. He has learned from this negative experience. And so he is no longer the person who made those juvenile mistakes. He goes back. He asks for forgiveness. He tells his father what he's learned, that he's learned from these mistakes. So the next part is, okay, what have you learned from these mistakes? The next part is, how have you changed as a result of what you have learned? Will you change? Have you changed? So for instance, it could be something simple. I never said I loved you enough. After my father had a heart attack, I thought he was going to die. But after that, I was with him in the hospital, and he had surgery, and one thing I learned was that I did not express my love for him, and that all the differences we had really didn't make any difference. So a change that took place in me personally was that I would say that I loved him regularly. He wasn't used to that. He was a World War II veteran from a stoic family that didn't express emotions. But I did it anyway, and after a couple years, he would say that too. Or he would say it every now and then in the beginning. So we would talk about what changes have occurred. How are you no longer the same person? And the third part is, how can you help others learn from what you have learned? Many times I'll be with a person who's dying in the hospital, and we go through the regrets, and they're reminiscing and telling me the stories, and we talk about the parabolic experience and that they're no longer the same person, and they say, but who can I help now? I'm dying. And I say, you've helped me. You've shared your story. You shared what you've learned. You're no longer the same person that you were. The person you've helped is me by sharing all of these experiences with me. Your life, the regrets, the stories, what you've learned, how you've changed. So as a therapist, even at the end of somebody's life, you can be the person who is present. You can be somebody who learns from them. I learn from every client. So that's just one more technique that you can add. That is a basic therapeutic process that I just do personally. So that's just kind of an introduction to this week, and we'll do another video and go over the notes and readings.